Okay, so we're learning today the Parsha Vayakhel. Literally, it means he gathered. And to place us where we need to be, Moses gathers the Jewish people and tells them about the commandment to build a temple. Now, to build a Mishkan, a tabernacle, the portable temple. What's interesting about this Parsha is that, with few exceptions, everything is repeated from a few weeks ago, where Moshe communicated with God. Told Moshe about all these specific details of how to build the temple with great detail, meaning the walls, the coverings, the furniture, and in very specific detail. And in this parsha, it's all repeated again. So the obvious question is, why do you have to repeat it at such a length? It's a long parsha, and it's, of course, repetitive. We read already all these details. So to the extent that is actually very funny, usually if you look at the Torah, there's some commentary from Rashi, of course. But in this parsha, if you look, for example, on this page, you have page after page of just the Torah with no Rashi's commentary. And the reason is, Rashi says, there are a few exceptions. There are some Rashis, but generally speaking, Rashi doesn't repeat what he already said, and he says, let me find the exact phrase. Okay, I don't see it right here, but he says, in short, he says, I already explained the work of the temple, so I don't have to repeat it. Melechet HaMishkan, Varpei Rashtim. I already repeated it. So Rashi does not repeat his commentary. Why should he? So that, again, highlights the question of why the Torah does. So you can't study this parsha without addressing that repetition. Of course, there are some details that are added in this parsha, but for the most part, a lot of this is repetitive. So with that introduction, we'll jump straight to the nutshell, and here we go. Okay, so this is the beginning of the parsha in a nutshell. What do we have here? I'll move this aside so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, the name of the parsha, Vayakhel, means and he gathered. And it is found in Exodus 35:1. Moses assembles the people of Israel and reiterates to them the commandment to observe the Shabbat. He then conveys God's instructions regarding the making of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. The people donate the required materials in abundance, bringing gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and red-dyed wool, goat hair, spun linen, animal skins, wood, olive oil, herbs, and precious stones. Moses has to tell them to stop giving because the people are very enthusiastic about building the temple. A team of wise-hearted artisans makes the Mishkan and its furnishings, as detailed in the previous Torah reading of Teruma, Tetzaveh, and Kitisa. But again, here it's reiterated. It's reiterated in the Torah at great length. It's a long parsha, 122 verses, which is on the longer side, probably one of the longest parshas of the Torah because of all this repetition. You see, even in the parsha, even the nutshell here, they don't want to repeat it, but the Torah repeats it. Okay, what do they build? They built 3 layers of roof coverings, 48 gold-plated wall panels, and 100 silver foundation sockets. The parochet, the veil that separates between the sanctuary's 2 chambers, and the masach screen that fronts it. The ark and its cover with the cherubim, the table and its showbread, the 7-branched menorah with its specially prepared oil, the golden altar and the incense burned on it, the anointing oil, the outdoor altar for burnt offerings and all its implements, the hangings, posts, and foundation sockets for the courtyard, and their basin and its pedestal made out of copper mirrors. That's the end of the parsha, repetition of everything we said till now. The Jewish people donate and then build everything that was told to them in the previous parsha. Like I mentioned, one of the important questions is why the repetition, not addressed directly in the Torah, but something we want to talk about, we want to think about. The repetition also gives us an opportunity to look at the new details in this parsha. In other words, some of the order changes, which that itself is an invitation to delve a little bit deeper. And also, it also gives us an opportunity to go back and revisit some of the things with the Mishkan, which we have not spoken about the first time around, some of the details of the temple that we have not spoken about the first time around. So now we could speak about it the second time around. And maybe that's why they're repeated. So in a Thursday class, which is just under an hour, you should have time to go through all the details. No, that was a joke. Okay. Let's begin with something general about the temple. I think I say it most years. It's a very nice interpretation, so I like it. But to bring that in, we have to talk about the commandments of the opening commandment of this parsha. So let's go back. We'll share the screen, and we'll talk about the opening commandments. So this is the Torah reading. Here we have it. Exodus chapter 35, Moses called the whole community of the children of Israel to assemble. And he said to them, these are the things that the Lord commanded to make. Well, this is a very interesting translation. I wondered how to do it in English. In the Art Scroll. In the Art Scroll, they translate to do, which makes more sense. La'asot is to do, to make. But here, I would expect that Moshe would tell us about the temple, because the whole parsha is about the temple, but he doesn't. First, he talks about the Shabbat. And like everywhere else in the Torah, it doesn't mention the Shabbat before it first mentions the idea of work for 6 days. So in other words, the mitzvah is to rest, but the mitzvah is also to work. So that's an interesting point. I don't know if we'll get into that today, but before he talks about the temple, he talks about Shabbat. 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day, you shall have sanctity, a day of complete rest for the Lord. Whoever performs work therein, on this day shall be put to death. You shall not kindle fire in any of your dwelling places on the Shabbat day. And Moses spoke to the entire community of the children of Israel, saying, this is the word that the Lord has commanded to say, take from yourselves an offering to the Lord. Every generous-hearted person shall bring it, namely the Lord's offering, gold, silver, copper, blue, purple, and crimson wool, and linen, and goat hair, etc., etc. So he talks to us about the temple, about the donations for the temple. But before that, he talks about Shabbat. Why does he talk about Shabbat before the temple? And why is it that Moses is doing it? Because God does it. After God talks to Moshe about the temple, God tells Moshe to reiterates to Moshe the commandment of Shabbat. So somehow these two themes of temple and Shabbat are connected. There are many ways which they are connected. Some very important details that derive from this juxtaposition, but I want to stay general. Generally, I want to think about it like this. Maybe what the Torah is alluding to us is that there's a very interesting connection between Shabbat and the temple. And that is that what is the temple? The temple is that there's a specific place that is holy, that is sacred. And in the same way, or in a similar way, there is also a space within time that is holy. So in other words, what the temple is for space, Shabbat is for time. And that's why we bring those two ideas together, because they both highlight that in both dimensions of time and space, and everything we know is everything we can understand is within the dimensions of time and space. Creation is within the dimensions of time and space. There's holiness within space, that's the temple. There's holiness within time, and that is Shabbat. So that's a nice thing. But then once we start thinking about temple and time, now we get to a very beautiful Hasidic commentary. And that is that we can picture the entire temple as, we know there were 3 rooms, as 3 times. Now there's 3 zones within time and 3 levels of holiness within time. So what we want to do now, right quickly, is reiterate what those 3 rooms were and what the equivalent is within the time. So what happens in the 3 rooms of the temple? So you had in their innermost chamber, so you had the structure had 2 rooms, the innermost chamber and the outer one. The innermost chamber, you had nothing but the ark. Now, the ark holds the word of God. It's the Torah. There's nothing else, just the Torah. That's the innermost chamber. That's called the Holy of Holies. Nobody entered there except for the high priest once a year on Yom Kippur, Holy of Holies. The outer chamber is called the Holy, sacred, not Holy of Holies, but the Holy. And there you had the menorah, which gives light. You had a table with bread. Priests would eat that bread. And you had an altar for incense. It would create nice, if you're going to eat supper, if you're going to eat the bread, you want to have incense, you want it to smell good. So that was more of a tranquil, peaceful place. There's bread, there's lights, there's everything you need for a home. Then there's the courtyard. And the courtyard had no covering. It was surrounded by curtains. And the courtyard was relatively large. And there is where you have what they call the outer altar. And the outer altar is the place where they would offer the offerings of mainly animal offerings, also some offerings of the vegetable kingdom, in other words, of wheat and oil, but mainly animal offerings. So that's what you had in these three chambers. Okay. Now, if we just finish saying that the temple is holiness within space, but there's the equivalent holiness within time, so comes the Hasidic commentary and says, in our life within the time, we also have these three dimensions of time. And the point here is that not that one is holier than the other, maybe in some ways, yes, but a person has to navigate between all these three. All these three chambers are important. If you're going to build a temple for God, either literally or figuratively or within time, within space, you need to have all these three dimensions. So now let's go through the three dimensions very quickly and and it's not that complicated. It's easy to remember. You have the work days, 6 days of the week. You have Shabbat. And then you have Yom Kippur, Holy of Holies, holiest day of the year. And now you're going to see how neatly these three periods of time align with the three outermost chambers. So with the three chambers in the temple. So the outer room, what happens during the 6 days of the week? 6 days of the week, primarily the person is in the world, engaged in the world. And in some sense, it's a struggle to earn a living, to affect the world, to accomplish what we want to accomplish. Also, spiritually, we're also in sort of a struggle mode. And we'll see in 2 weeks when we get to the third book of Leviticus, which is the book all about the offerings in the temple represent bringing the physical matter closer to God. In Hebrew, the word sacrifice is offering. It's really korban, becoming close. So the struggle during the week is to engage in the material world, things that are physical, things that are negative perhaps, and bring them in to holiness. That's the spiritual struggle. But in some ways, also in the physical world, what are we doing? We're trying to go out in the world into an environment which is relatively hostile, and we want to be able to incorporate some of that, achieve and succeed, and bring some of that bounty home back to our home. That is a state of struggle. That's the 6 days of the week. We work. So the work represents physical work, but also spiritual work. Okay. And if you were in the outer courtyard of the temple, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of the animals there, there's noise, it's bloody, it's a mess. Okay. Comes Shabbat. What happens on Shabbat? On Shabbat, there's no more struggle with the negativity. On Shabbat, you go into the temple, you're going into a sacred space. Here, there is physical and spiritual. So Shabbat is a spiritual time, but Shabbat, it's also a mitzvah to enjoy yourself in the most physical way. Person is supposed to eat, person is supposed to drink, person is supposed to indulge in food and drink. All pleasures is supposed to be reserved for Shabbat. Even it's a mitzvah to engage in physical intimacy on Shabbat as a sign of, as a way of honoring Shabbat. So it's all about sanctifying the physical, but not the battle. When you're in the state of Shabbat, the physical world is no longer a threat to you. The physical world is an expression of your holiness. So looking at the temple, now you're indoors. There's no animals. You're not struggling with the animalistic part of self. There is bread, which represents all physical pleasures. Bread is a metaphor for all food in the Bible. When it says bread, it means a meal. Okay, so you're engaged in the physical world. In other words, in pleasure, in physical objects, but those physical objects themselves are sacred. When you eat the meal of Shabbat, that physical activity of eating a meal is a mitzvah. So it's not like you're outside battling with the negativity. You're eating bread, but the bread is a mitzvah. So that's the second step. And then you get to the third step. Third step, you go to the Holy of Holies, and that's the innermost chamber. High priest only went in there once a year. And the equivalent for that for us is Yom Kippur. What happens on Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur It's not that we eat the bread and the bread is sacred. There's no food at all. We're just on the level of soul. We're not connected to our body on Yom Kippur. We're not supposed to eat or drink or engage in any pleasure, or intimacy is prohibited also, in contrast to Shabbat, where it's a mitzvah. So the point here is you get into a space where we're just in touch with our soul. That's Yom Kippur. Shabbat is about the physical world is already sanctified. Weekday, it's struggling to sanctify the physical world and the parts of self that have not yet been refined yet. And which one of these is important? They're all important. And you're not supposed to be stuck in one room. You have to move between the rooms. In other words, it's not enough to say, I'm going to be on Yom Kippur, I'm just going to worry about my soul. I'm not going to worry about sanctifying the physical world or sanctifying the more physical parts of life. And then Shabbat is the time where you are celebrating what has been sanctified already, and your physical environment has been sanctified. But that's not enough. You also have to go out into the world and sanctify the rest of the world. That's the 6 days of creation. So this is just a way of thinking about the temple, the 3 rooms of the temple, the 2 rooms of the actual structure, and then the courtyard as 3 periods of time: weekday, Shabbat, and Yom Kippur. So I think that's very, very easy to think about, and it's a sort of an organizing theme of how to put all these themes of the various tools of the temple to put it into perspective and to make it meaningful to us, because today we don't have the temple in the physical sense. We have it in the spiritual sense. We don't have it in the physical sense, but we certainly have it in the dimension of time. So I think for me, that's an easy way of organizing all these themes and how they all come together. Okay. Another important point to think about is the repetition. As I mentioned, the Torah could have saved probably at least 100 verses by just saying Moshe communicated the commandment about the temple to the people, and the people did exactly as God said. That would be an easy way to save 100 verses. Tomorrow, first of all, give the rabbi a very easier time tomorrow when he reads the Torah. It's a tricky portion to read because I don't want to get technical, but there's 3 ways of saying and in Hebrew. There's the, which is just one vowel, but then there's et, and there's eight, and et and eight in the Ashkenazi pronunciation are different. And then go remember what's the et and what's the eight. Very hard parsha to read, this one and next one. So the service tomorrow would have been 20 minutes shorter. The Torah would have been a few pages shorter. We would know everything we need to know. Why do you have to reiterate Moshe spoke to the people, and then the people went and the people did? So that's sort of the elephant in the room question that we want to address. I want to address it. I'll get to that in a second. In addition to that, there's also some slight deviation between the way Moshe tells it to the people and the way the people actually build it. There's a whole discussion. I don't want to get into this too much, but from God's perspective, God first tells Moshe about the furniture. First thing he says, make the ark, then make the table, then make the menorah, then make the altar. And then he says, oh, by the way, we got all these vessels, we got all these pieces of furniture. Oh, okay, we got to build a structure. So build the roof and then build the walls. It's almost like you go to the store and you're walking down Greenwich Avenue and you go to that Restoration Hardware and you see a beautiful couch and you say, I want that couch. And then you say, but the couch is too big for my apartment. What am I going to do? Okay, you know what? We're going to build a house to house the couch. You don't do that. Most normal people don't do that, right? Most people first build a home and then build the furniture and then pick the furniture. But to design your house around your furniture, it's unusual. But in the Torah, the way God communicates it to Moshe, it's exactly what God tells Moshe. I want an ark, I want a table, I want a menorah, I want an altar for incense. Oops. Oh yeah, build a roof and walls. Now, when Moshe communicates this information to the architect, to the chief architect, Bezalel, we know the names of the 2 chief architects, Bezalel and Ahaliav. They say, hey, this is ridiculous. They say, this is not the way things are done in the real world. That's what they say. But nohag shebe'olam, in the world, that's not the way it's done. In the world, you first build a home and then you build the furniture. So politely and gently, Bezalel inquires to Moshe, maybe you didn't hear it exactly. It's not exactly clear what happens in that conversation. And the reality is Bezalel, the chief architect, builds it the way normal people do, which means first build a home and then they build the furniture. So there's some change. It's enough here. You see something is happening. There's some change the way it's communicated to Moshe and the way it's actually implemented. So putting all this together, I could also throw in a few more details, but I'm going to throw that in later. Once we have the framework of what I want to say, then you can put in the pieces of the puzzle. My goal is not to confuse. My goal is to clarify. So we'll put in the last piece of the puzzle at the end once we build the structure. And here it's like this. And I'm going to talk for myself. This may resonate with you. This may not resonate with you. If it doesn't, let me know. If it does, tell me also, so I'll be in good company. It'll save me money on therapy. I'll know from you that I'm not the only one suffering from this. So there is a possibility that people create this vision in any area. It doesn't really matter for what. It could be personal, it could be professional, it could be in a relationship. It doesn't matter. You have a vision of what you want to achieve. The problem with the vision is in the vision, it's perfect. But the reality is never going to live up to the vision. What do I do when the reality doesn't live up to the vision? I always say, I look at, you have my phone, it pops up the pictures from the past. So I'm old enough now. I've been using the same app for a long time, for many years now. So I get pictures from 2012, 14 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I look at these pictures and I say, what a beautiful life these people live, talking about myself. So you see the picture sitting with the kids at Todd's Point or in Beach Island, and everything is so tranquil. Everything is so beautiful. Now, I was there. So I remember what happened when I was there. First of all, it was too hot. Second of all, the kids were complaining because there was sand in their mouth. Third of all, I had a headache and I was dehydrated. In the reality, it never lives up to the picture, right? Then I come home and I'm upset because I had this perfect idea. We're going to have a Sunday at the beach in Greenwich. And I come home and I'm dealing with the sand. And now I have to, it's just almost by definition. That's my point here. Almost by definition, when we make a plan, I'm going to get married. Okay. I'm going to have the perfect relationship. Now, the reality is there is no such thing as a perfect relationship. And if there were a perfect relationship, it wouldn't be a relationship. It would just be a fairy tale, right? So, but I have this ideal of I want to achieve something. I have this vision. The reality is when it plays out, it may play out a little bit different than the way I perfected it in my vision. Maybe better, maybe worse, certainly different. Now, how do people react to this discrepancy? Some people over time learn, they get upset. I had this perfect birthday party. Someone told me a true story that their friend was upset about them. I'm not going to say names, but someone told me a thing because they went out for their birthday and it was this person's birthday and the other person spoke about themselves on the other person's birthday. So the birthday girl was offended that when they went out for the birthday, the other person said something about themselves and now distracting them from their birthday. They had spun this vision of what this birthday party is going to look like. And you came and you said something about yourself. Now my birthday party is ruined. 2 months later, I heard about it. So it obviously bothered the person, right? So one thing is frustration. I had this vision. It didn't work. It didn't happen exactly the way I wanted. I'm frustrated. That's one approach. The other approach is people, they just stop having visions. I'm not going to plan something because I know it's not going to happen anyway. Okay? Right? Because there's going to be a tension between the vision and the reality. That's for sure. That's a given. I think we can all agree. Now, what do I do about this? So either I stop imagining or I imagine that I'm going to do something. When it doesn't happen the way exactly I want it, I get frustrated. And it could be anything. It could be professionally, personally, whatever it is. You bring the examples from your own life. What is the Torah telling us? The Torah is telling us there is the vision. The vision is the last two portions. The way God tells it to Moses, that's the vision. And give that all the attention it needs. Don't stop dreaming. That's like the dream. That's like the vision in your brain of what you want to achieve in any area, like I said. Don't just come and say, oh, we're going to try to do everything God said. When it comes to these parshas, the execution deserves just as much attention as the vision. There's going to be a disparity between the two. And you'll see there's certain details where Bezalel ends up changing. The order is the most obvious, but there are other subtle details. That's okay. There's going to be difference. That still give the attention, give the vision its right attention, and give the execution the right attention. Don't cut corners at either side. Keep dreaming. Keep picturing what you want. Keep trying to implement. Understand that it's never going to reflect each other perfectly. but you can't lose one or the other. You can't stop dreaming, and you can't stop dreaming, and you can't be disappointed that your implementation did not fully reflect the vision, because it's impossible. Even God's vision, the way he presented it to Moses, is not going to be presented exactly the way Bezalel did it. That in practically God's idea, first borrowing the furniture and then building the home, it just doesn't work in the real world. Now we understand why God did it, because in some ways, yes. If I really take you to the therapist and sit you down on the couch and I say, you want a house? Why do you want a house? And if I really press you to the corner, it's because you want to sit on Saturday morning or on Sunday morning on the couch with your feet up. In other words, you could identify what you really want. You want the house for the functionality. You want the house because for the tennis court. You want, in some ways, that's true. In some ways, you want the house so you could sit by the window and drink coffee. So when God tells Moses, build an ark first, that's because he's saying the ark is the most important thing here. Now, practically, you can't build a swimming pool before you lay a foundation. You can't buy furniture before you build a home. What are you going to do with the furniture? So Bezalel says, look, in the real, even the divine vision, even Hashem's vision, if I want to implement it, it's going to have to be a little bit different than the original. And that's okay. And again, that don't take away from the vision, and don't be frustrated at the implementation. To me, that's the most important takeaway of this repetition of at least 100 verses. Now I'm going to give you one more subtlety, and now you'll see what it says. Usually, the Torah uses the same terms, the way God conveyed the information to Moshe, and the way it was actually conveyed, and the way Moshe conveyed it to Bezalel, to the architect, and the way the Bezalel actually did it. And this is very interesting. There's one exception, the menorah. When God tells Moshe to make the menorah, he refers to it as menorah of gold. When Moshe tells Bezalel to make it, he says menorah, not menorah of gold. When they actually make it, he says menorah of gold. So the rabbis who study this very carefully, they stop and say, 1 second, what happened here? Is it menorah of gold or is it menorah? Which one is it? What's the answer? The answer is that it's the menorah of gold. You're supposed to make the menorah of gold. However, and this is very interesting because this is an anomaly. This does not apply to the other vessels of the temple. However, what happens if for whatever reason the people are poor? Not right then. Right then everyone had money, everyone donated. They had too much. They had to say, stop donating. All the servers were crashing. They had to shut down the website. Stop donating your money. There was no more room. But theoretically, later on, there could be a time that people do not have money. They don't have the gold. So the law is, remember what Moshe told Bezalel, make a menorah. The menorah does not have to be of gold. And you can make it of any other metal. And indeed, in the second temple, in the story of Hanukkah, when the Maccabees took over the temple and got rid of the Greeks and rededicated the temple, and they built the menorah, and we all know because we all celebrate it, that menorah, drum roll, was not of gold. The people were fighting in a war, a guerrilla war of I guess independence. They didn't have any money. They didn't have gold, and they certainly did not have gold for the extra gold for the menorah in the temple. So then they actually made the menorah of other metals, cheap metals, and then later they upgraded it back. Years later, they rebuilt. I think it's the times of Herod, but I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it was a little bit before that. They upgraded the temple and they made a menorah of gold. So what is and that accounts for the discrepancy here, that sometimes it says menorah of gold and sometimes it says menorah, because the menorah should be made of gold but doesn't have to be made of gold. Now remember, this is an anomaly because other vessels of the temple, you can't replace it. If you don't have it, you don't have it. In fact, at the second temple, there was no ark. The ark, in some ways, we could discuss this maybe either in a few minutes or next week. In some ways, the ark is the central piece of furniture of the temple. Yet you may know that in the second temple there was no ark, because it's not clear what happened to it. It's another whole discussion, but it certainly was hidden or taken captive or hidden. There was no ark in the end of the first temple and the second temple. So it's not like, I don't have an ark, let's build something else. No, you don't have an ark, you do nothing. You can't make a replica, right? You have to have the authentic thing. If you don't have it, then a replacement, an inauthentic replacement is not going to do it. That's for the most part. But when it comes to the menorah, you don't have gold, no problem. Use regular metal. To me, I just read this morning. I'll be honest with you. The menorah. I'm going to confess my ignorance. I had no idea about this. I knew that you're allowed to have a menorah that is not gold. That's in the Talmud. That's in the Maimonides. But I didn't know that it's alluded to in this subtlety that sometimes it says menorah of gold and sometimes it says menorah. So I didn't know that till this morning. And as soon as I read it this morning, I said, okay, this ties into what I said earlier. The vision is menorah of gold, which is bring light to your house. I want to have an inspiring Friday night dinner. Problem is that it's late and I'm tired and 2 kids are sleeping on the couch and 2 kids are fighting. So I could just give up. Or I could say, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to sit and I'm going to sing a song. I'm going to say a story. I'll do my best to raise the atmosphere. And then, okay, it doesn't have to be an hour long. It could be 10 minutes long. But I'm going to try to make it meaningful, even though this was not exactly the menorah of gold. This is not the peace and the tranquility that I imagined for myself at the end of the week, right? But that's what the Torah is saying. You don't have gold? Okay. Do anything you could to bring some light, even if it's other metals, even if it's not as fancy as gold. But don't forget that the vision is the gold. So you have both those elements that on one hand, you're seeking to create you have a vision of what you want to achieve and you're aspiring and you're aspirational, but that aspiration doesn't rob you of enjoying the practical, even though by definition, almost the practical will never fully align with the aspiration because it can't, because aspiration is infinite. I can always want to grow. And in the reality, in the physical world, you have to grow. First of all, the physical world is not infinite, but even if it were, even if you can keep growing, it has to be done step by step. You can't just achieve everything that you want to achieve. We're not in paradise. We're not in the world of perfection. So for me, this is very meaningful, and because it's practical in my life, because I always struggle with this idea of what I want and then celebrate what I'm doing and what I have, even though it's not exactly aligned with the big picture of what I want. Okay. So that is a little bit about the repetition.
It's locked.
Go ahead, Dr. John, please.
Rabbi, isn't a very short version of what you said the notion from Pirkei Avos, which says, who is wealthy? The man who is happy with what he has?
Yes, that's one side of the equation. On the other hand, it's also, you also have to keep the vision, right? So that's the challenge here. It's not like I'm happy with what I have, so I'm not going to try to grow, right? There's a balance. I think about this a lot. I think that it's very difficult. I think that whoever has this balance is it's hard to get this balance right. So you have ambition and you have happiness. And in some ways, they're almost contradictory. Because ambition means either consciously or subconsciously, I need more. I'm not satisfied with what I have. It's joy, happiness, as you described, is exactly what the sages say. You know who's wealthy? Who's happy with what they have. If I have a 70-foot yacht, but you have an 80-foot yacht, and I'm looking at your yacht instead of looking at my yacht, I'll never be happy, right? So by definition, it's the opposite of ambition. Now, which one is right? Am I supposed to be ambitious? Am I supposed to be happy? Assuming that I'm correct, that they're conflicting in some ways, I think they are. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think, at least for me, the way I feel them, I think it's a little bit of a contradiction. And the answer is that it really depends. When you're on your yacht, enjoy the yacht. When you're trying to work to increase your success, then don't be happy, then be ambitious. In other words, in some ways, 6 days a week and Shabbat. 6 days a week is ambition. Shabbat is enjoy. Enjoy what you achieved. Now, in a small scale, every day there's also Shabbat. The sages say when you study Torah, it's Shabbat. When you pray, it's Shabbat. Spend time with your family, it's Shabbat. So if you can come home for lunch or for dinner and shut off your ambition, turn off your cell phone, then you have the right balance. In fact, what the sages say about Shabbat is very interesting. They say, not that you have to stop working, that's easy. They say Shabbat you have to think about as all your work is done. There's nothing left to do. You're going to turn on your cell phone on Saturday night, oh, I have a whole list of to-do lists. But on Shabbat, there's no ambition. On Shabbat is joy. And throughout the day also, the moments of Shabbat, when I'm with my family, when I'm trying to enjoy, when I'm celebrating, there you're happy. But on the other hand, if I'm just happy and I don't have the vision, then I'm ultimately I'm not going to grow, because there's the concept of I want to grow and I want to keep, no matter how beautiful this vacation was, I could have spent more time. We could have had more meaningful conversations. We could have had more, more opportunities to connect, etc. So that's important too. The idea here is there's going to be a discrepancy between my vision and the success I achieved, and don't compromise on either. Celebrate what you have, enjoy what you have, celebrate it, enjoy it. Still strive for the complete vision. Try to do both at the same time. Do I know how to do this? Not necessarily. That's why I'm here talking to you. Hopefully you'll give me some feedback and teach me how to, and help me do that myself. Go ahead.
Rabbi, what you've described is the essence of what I'm sure all of the people on this call, if they're familiar with it, know as dialectic behavior therapy. And the dialectic is exactly what you've described. It is the integration of presumable opposites. So It is accepting yourself as you are, but wanting to continue to grow. That's the dialectic.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So just to stay on that theme, because we have 5 minutes left, we'll go back to the repetition. We'll go back to the ark, and we'll talk about the ark. Is that what I want to say? I want to talk about something else. I wanted to talk about something else. Okay, we'll keep that for next week. We'll keep the menorah for next week. Let's do a little bit about staying on the theme about the ark. So the ark was a very interesting piece of work, piece of furniture, and like everything else in Judaism is complicated. So even what is the theme of the ark? Even there, you have some discrepancy and disagreement. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to show you a picture of the ark on Chabad.org. Hopefully, and then we could talk about the meaning and the significance, and hopefully that we'll be able to talk about the spiritual meaning. I'm just trying to think. I have to look for a half decent picture, but here we go. Okay. Share screen. Okay, I'm sure you saw pictures of the ark. Maybe you watched a movie. But there's different pictures here. I'm not trying to censor anything, but I'm just going to take one from Chabad.org. Where is it? I'll take, let's say, where's the one I was looking at? Okay, let's take this one. Why not? Okay, so the reason why this is interesting, here you have the ark. The ark you had basically was a box with 3 layers, outer layer of gold, then a layer of wood, and then a layer of gold. Inside the ark was supposed to be the 10 Commandments. Ended up being both sets of 10 Commandments. The second tablets, which were complete, and the first tablets, which were shattered, were all placed within the ark. According to some opinions, later on, there was also a Torah scroll. But without getting into that right now, you had the ark, then you had the covering. And the covering was more interesting because it was more cryptic. It's not exactly clear. It was called, in Hebrew, it's called the Keruvim. 2 images, 2 people. We know they have wings. That's what we know. We don't know much more about them. According to the Jewish perspective, I don't know what the other faiths say, but the Jewish reading is, the traditional reading is that it's actually male and female. The faces of male and female. Some people say young children. And the wings hover over, creating a shade over the what they call the kaporet, which is the cover. I am sharing the screen, which is the covering of the ark. This is the kaporet, the covering of the ark. And then this would be the cherubim covering them. Now, what exactly is this theme? What exactly does this represent? How do we apply this to our life is a question. Now, the ark is relatively easy. People say that the ark represents the Torah. Am I sharing the screen? You see the screen? You see the picture? You do. Okay. The ark represents the Torah. That's easy. So if I ask you, how do I have an ark? The Torah says build an ark. But I'm not building an ark, a physical ark, because we don't have a temple. And I see it said that the temple we had, the ark that we had, the ark was hidden already for thousands of years. But when the Torah says make a temple, and we said it means not just literal but figurative, and God will dwell in the soul of every person. So making an ark means making space within my life for the Word of God, for the Torah. So if you come on Thursday morning at 10:15, you're making an ark. And if you study Torah at home, you're making an ark. So that's clear. It's very nice. You have to have an ark. You also have to have the poles, by the way, which is interesting. There's a special commandment that the poles of the ark are not removed from the ark. It's a separate thing. There are rings at the corners. Then you have sticks within the ark, and it's like never take the sticks, which were meant to carry. The sticks are for carrying the ark. Never take it out of the rings, which is very strange. Why is that a commandment? We have 613 commandments. That's one of them. Why is that so important? So there's all kinds of interpretations. Some of them very interesting, like the idea that the Torah, by definition, has to be taken wherever we go. It's not written for the people who received it only 3,300 years ago, but by definition, it's portable, it's movable. It can be applied to every culture and every society. And if we cross the Atlantic and come to this country, we bring the Torah with us. And every person could bring the Torah to their life. It doesn't just remain in the abstract and the world of ideas, but the application of the Torah to every circumstance is what the sticks represent. But that's a distraction. It's not a distraction, it's important, but I want to talk about the coverings. Question is, the ark is studying Torah, that we get. What is the covering? So there's two interpretations, Rashi, Nachmanides. Nachmanides says it's one and the same. Everything, by the way, they also define it as one. Nachmanides, it's also a question whether I define this as one vessel or two vessels. There are practical applications to that as well. Nachmanides says this is one vessel. You have the ark, you have the covering, all the theme of the Torah. So what do I need the covering for? This represents the bond, the unity between God and the Jewish people, male and female, God and Jewish people, that happens through studying Torah. So when you study Torah, you're not just sitting there and thinking about an abstract piece of information, but we believe that the greatest unity that you can have is with God is through the Torah, because when you understand something, you unite, you grasp the person. If I understand something, I grasp it. And the greatest unity and intimacy I can have with God is if I understand the Torah, because I'm understanding God's wisdom. If I'm understanding and grasping God's wisdom, that's the only way to grasp God himself. So that's one theme, Nachmanides. This is all Torah. We're looking at the Torah here. The box is the container of the Torah. The covering and the cherubim represents the unity and the intimacy that we have with Hashem through study of Torah. Okay. Rashi says no. Rashi says there's two separate things. The ark is the ark. The ark is the Torah. The covering is not the Torah. What could be higher than the Torah? The Torah is the word of God. What could be higher than the Torah? Says Rashi, implies Rashi, doesn't say it explicitly, but the implication is the word for covering is kaporet. Kaporet comes from the word kapara, atonement. What's above the Torah? Torah is the rule book. This is how God wants you to live. When you raise your children, you tell them your values. In this house, we brush our teeth, we make our bed, we pick up the toys, we say thank you, we say please. This is the rule book. This is the Torah. These are the values. But there's something deeper than the values, or higher than the values. And higher than the values is the unconditional love between parent and child. And forgiveness, the word for the covering again is kaporet, which is the same letters as kapara, which is atonement. Forgiveness comes because of the unconditional love. Because when a person violates the rule book, so maybe the relationship is over. No, it's not over. Why isn't it over? It's not over because it's something deeper. And the deeper is the bond that runs deeper than the rules. So according to to Rashi, when you go into the Holy of Holies, what do you see? You see the Torah, which is the conventional way of connecting to God. But then you also have to see the kaporet, the covering. The covering represents their understanding that the bond between God and the Jewish people, between the God and the soul, is actually deeper than the Torah. The Torah is the way to connect. But what happens when I violate the connection? Does that mean the bond is nullified? The answer is no, it can never be nullified. There's always forgiveness, and forgiveness comes from a place of unconditional love, which is why, according to the sages, it's not just male and female, but it's a young child, young boy, young girl. The younger the child it is, the more you feel the unconditional love. I have a baby at home, 3 weeks old. The love is unconditional. I also have a spread. Kids are a little older. As the kids get older, you want more. You're frustrated when they don't do what you think they should be doing at that age. And how come you're not going to sleep on time? How come you're not making your bed, etc.? But to the young one, they wake you up in the middle of the night. You have no complaints. The love is unconditional. And in some ways, thinking about these two themes of the practical and the aspirational, and both are true, with our children, it's the same way. We have unconditional love, and hopefully they know that. But that doesn't mean they don't have to live by your values. And they don't have to behave the way they should in your home. As long as you're paying the rent or you're paying the mortgage, you should lay down the rules. If not, you're not helping them, right? So you have to have both. You have to convey both. On one hand, there's unconditional love. On the other hand, we have to respect each other. And we have to play by the rules. And you have to be able to sort of to do both of those in any healthy relationship. If you have one without the other, if the child feels my parent loves me only because I get a 90 on the test, and not because of who I am, that's a problem. If the child says, my parent loves me anyway, so I may as well get a 50 on the test, that's also a problem, right? You have to be able to manage both those truths together simultaneously. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful day. We'll meet each other in good health in the future, God willing. Anybody wants to stay, to discuss, to debate, you're welcome to stay, but we're officially concluded. Everyone have a wonderful day. So nice to see everybody. Go ahead, doctor, please.
Rabbi, let me ask you this. You talk about unconditional love and the importance of having it and conveying it. What does the Torah say? What do our sages say about someone who grows up in a home where they don't experience at all unconditional love? How does one learn to do it if one hasn't been exposed to it?
That's a very good question. A very big tragedy, I would say, but a very important question. There's a beautiful commentary on a verse of King David. King David, in one of the Psalms, I think Psalm 27, he says, my father and mother abandoned me, but God took me in. If you know the story, he was the youngest kid. He didn't get any attention. Nobody looked at him. He ended up being chosen. He did not feel loved by his parents, certainly not unconditionally. But he said, but God took me in. What is unconditional love? Unconditional love is that I feel that my parents value me for who I am, regardless of what I do. Now, that is a very encouraging concept. But it's very, especially when I'm a child. But what happens if I'm an adult and I say, okay, my mother really thinks I'm great. Okay, so that's very healthy to have. And if I didn't have it, it's a tragedy and it's super important for my development. But now that I'm adult, big deal. First of all, she's my mother, so she says it. Second of all, what does she know? Just because she values me, does that mean I have value? And ultimately, the value I have to realize that I am valuable, and I do have indispensable value because God tells me so, because I have a part of God. So when I'm a child and I have unconditional love, the reason why that's important is not so much because my mother values me. That's true. My mother teaches me that I have value, but ultimately my mother doesn't convey the value. God conveys the value. My mother is the conduit. And when I get older, because I know what unconditional value means, unconditional love and value means, I can also apply it and say, God values me. If I didn't have it from my mother, it's very difficult to have to go to therapy. But ultimately, it doesn't come from my mother, it comes from God. So what King David is saying, in some ways, I hate to say this, but King David is saying, in some ways, the fact that I didn't get it from my mother, I got it only from God, in a way, that's more valuable because now, what's my bedrock? God values me. I had no choice but to realize that God values me, to give me that bedrock so I can have a foundation to live on. So I'm not suggesting you should go David's route. I think you should get unconditional love from your parents, and they should give you, convey to you that you have your value is indispensable, but they're conveying it to you, they're showing you, they're teaching you, but they're teaching you that you have value, not because mother thinks so, but because God thinks so. And mother is the conduit to teach that to you. But if you don't get it from mother, you don't get it from father, you get it from God. That's the short answer. Okay, wonderful day, everybody. Thank you all for joining. And it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a good one. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Go ahead. Dr. John, you want to say something or no? Okay, perfect. You're muted. I don't hear you. You're muted.
I wanted to say thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Very brilliant exposition on a fundamental aspect of the human experience. In other words, the question I asked you was a very, very deep question. Your answer about King David was brilliant. And I'm thinking of the people who, in many ways, have had really tough lives, but somehow, because they have that connection to God, have a centeredness and they can withstand unbelievable disappointment and trauma, et cetera, in their lives and still continue to go forward. So what you've shared with me this morning and with our group is very, very profound.
Thank you. Thank you. And I have to hear it as well. And I have to internalize it as well. So thank you for letting me talk about it so I can internalize it, strive to internalize it. Thank you.